The maiden walked into the palace as led by the palace guard, looking so scared and curious to know where the king was. She stopped at a point and asked the guard if she could wait there for the king, but the palace guard insisted on taking her further inside the king's living room, where he was instructed to bring her to. The maiden followed him without any further questions, but was still thinking of why the palace living room was that far from the entrance. She imagined being the builder of the palace and said to herself that she wouldn't waste so much space for the hallway of a house. After some minutes she had been following the palace guard, they finally got to where the king was. "Greetings, my king," she said as she knelt down to greet the king. The king responded to her greetings and asked what brought her to the palace. She couldn't beat about the bush because she feared that she had just interrupted the king's meeting with his people, so she spilled the beans. "My king, I have come to surrender myself as a sacrificial lamb for the kingdom to get back her peace. I would be glad if I'm accepted as one of the 7 virgin maidens that was announced to be needed for the urgent sacrifice." The king was overwhelmed to hear this, as that would be the first maiden to appear at the palace following the announcement the town crier had made days before then. He immediately asked her to stand up and smile to his people that was a good sign they'd soon complete the number of virgins they were looking for. She was immediately taken to the backyard of the palace for goodies to be given to her for her family. This was not part of the earlier announced prize. It was just to show how serious the kingdom was about finding maidens for the sacrifice. She collected the goodies and went home in peace. The maiden in question was from a very poor family. No one had ever been rich in her generation. She wanted to sacrifice herself for the entire family and rest knowing that she being sacrificed to the gods on behalf of the kingdom would forever turn things around for her family. Walking through the streets of Umuraran Kingdom to her house, people saw the gifts she had with her and started gossiping of how serious the king was about the announcement from the palace. They had great pity on the lady for taking such a bold step and wished for such not to befall them. Following the appearance of the maiden in the palace, 6 other maidens appeared in the palace for the same cause. They claimed to have been very poor and was at the palace for the same reason as the first maiden who showed up there. News got to the king in the palace and nothing seemed to be enough to quantify his joy. He was so happy that he sent a message to the chief priest immediately he received the news from the guards, even before he stepped outside to see these maidens. He told the messenger to tell the chief priest that the materials for the sacrifice was now complete and that the chief priest should prepare at his end for it to take place immediately. They were going to meet up at an unusual T-junction near the village square. He also sent another guard to get the warriors to assemble at the palace and to tell the Balogun to start preparing for his warrior's sacrifice. After he got that settled, he went in to change his clothes because he believed he was going to go out after seeing those maidens. He saw no need for going back inside his chambers to have a change of clothes after meeting them. He did all he had to do and finally came out to see the maidens. He smiled as he sighted them from afar while walking down the stairs outside to meet them. When he got closer to them, his mood changed. He frowned his face and demanded that one of those maidens follow him immediately. He had noticed one of them was not a virgin because he had once forcefully lied with her during one of his trips to his farm before he became king. He knew her and still recognized her so well, even after so many years had passed by. He wasn't going to allow her join the maidens to march down to the chief priest and have him disgraced publicly. He wanted to see her privately to ask why she claimed to be a virgin when she knew quite well that she wasn't. She followed the king just as he commanded. No one dares disobey the king's order, not even his wife. King Desla recounted the ordeal he had with her and how he begged her to forgive and forget. Then he asked why the maiden showed her face again at the palace when she knew they needed only virgin maidens. She eyed him rudely and said she only wanted to do that for her family. She said that was her family's only chance of getting rich in Omuraran Kingdom. She told him that her family had requested this from her because they thought she was still a virgin. They assured her that she would be remembered for this from generation to generation. She had no option but to be at the palace for the sacrifice. She threatened to expose King Desla should he try to tell anyone she wasn't a virgin, and that he also had to make sure she was confirmed virgin by the chief priests. King Deja at this point knew he was in trouble, and no one would be able to save him. He knew he would be doomed should anyone discover this from the maiden. He had no choice but to dance to the maiden's tune and do her bidding. He asked her to leave his presence at 1. After being dumbfounded the whole time, the maiden was talking. He was literally sweating in a place that had good air circulating round the whole place. His crown became suddenly too hot on his head. He removed it and started thinking of how he was going to convince his people of his innocence and blackmail. He thought of how he was supposed to explain to the people that he was just young and naive when he did that. He thought of confiding in the chief priest and telling him to help him out. He cancelled that thought when he remembered the virginity confirmation was going to be done in the presence of so many people. He stood up from his throne and sat on the sofa next to him. He needed to come up with a quick solution because he had sent words earlier to everyone involved in the sacrifice. He then remembered the chief priest was in dire need of money. He wanted to use it to renovate the cracking wall of his house before it fell completely. He picked up his crown where he had placed it some minutes before that time, wore it and dashed so fast outside. He managed to tell the maidens outside that he would soon be back for them, as he had his driver drive him off so fast. He was heading to the shrine to silence the chief priest with money before anyone would get to him. He wanted to see the chief priest privately and beg him to maneuver the virginity confirmation of one of those maidens. He told him he had to do that to cover his shame and protect the name he had worked so hard to build for himself. The chief priest agreed to his request after a little time of going back and forth. He didn't know what the king had done to make him resort to begging him for manipulations, but felt that was his only chance of demanding for the exact amount of money he needed if he was going to renovate his house in no time. He listened to King Deja's plea and changed the real means he wanted to use to confirm the maiden's virginity. The 6 maidens were brought to the shrine for virginity confirmation before heading to the T-junction for the sacrifice proper. The other maiden who came first had been tested and confirmed, so she didn't need to go for the confirmation with the other maidens. Just before the virginity confirmation began, the chief priest had sounded a note of warning to the maidens to confess their true virginity status before being tested. He said if the result came out negative, that they wouldn't be spared at all, as they would be instantly imprisoned by the palace guards. Tobi, the maiden that was forcefully laid with by the king, looked at the Balogun, his warriors, and every other person present there, started shivering as she didn't know if the king had earlier made plans for her with the chief priest or not. She made an attempt to raise her hands to confess she was no longer a virgin and what had led to that, but she braved up after looking at the king, who signaled her that she should be calm. The chief priest didn't see anyone raise their hand to confess. Besides, it was just for formality, so he continued with what he wanted to do. All through the process, Tobi's was not at rest, as she wasn't too sure the gods would cooperate with the chief priest in maneuvering the result of that test. But what she didn't know was that the chief priest didn't, in the real sense, involve the gods in that process. It was just all for formality. In no time, the chief priest was done with the virginity confirmation, and none of them was proclaimed not a virgin. They then proceeded to the T-junction together with the maiden who showed up first in the palace and some passers-by. They had the maidens tie white wrapper as a symbol of purity and carried pots on their heads to make sure each warrior bathed with that water after the maidens must have been slaughtered by the shrine butcher. They all passed the fastest route to this junction, moving on a file one after the other, and got there in no time. The chief priest asked the maidens to kneel on a file facing the big tree at this junction, and they did. Families and friends present there shed tears as their beloved young potential mothers were about to be offered as sacrifice to the gods, without leaving a piece of them behind. Women cried in a loud voice and children watched innocently. Fathers put their hands underneath their chin looking sad, as they couldn't cry because men were known to be the braver gender. They stood forming a parallel line, leaving the sacrifice to be performed in the middle. A calabash was brought out to collect an amount of water from the maiden's pot and make it go round their heads 3 times,
while the chief priest muttered some indistinct words to communicate with the gods. After he had said a lot of incantations and the warriors giving some marks in their bodies, the shrine butcher was called upon to come spill the blood of the maidens on Omuaran land and warriors. I stood by the king as his guard that I was, and I watched these maidens being killed for sacrifice. I couldn't hold my tears from dripping down my cheeks. I was supposed to be strong for everyone being a guard, but I wasn't. I prayed silently in my heart that the sacrifice be accepted by the gods, so that the death of the virgin maidens wouldn't be in vain.